Hi guys, welcome to Logic Snippet number 6, in which we cover the modus tollens and the thing that never happened. So, modus tollens. This is the twin to the modus ponens, and just like the modus ponens, that's not its whole name. Its whole name is modus tollendo tollens, and it means the mode that by denying denies, which does feel redundant, and so we just call it the modus tollens. Sometimes you'll see the modus ponens called an MP and the modus tollens called an MT. Both of these are hypothetical syllogisms. When you hear the word hypothetical, think hypothetical scenario like, what if we did this, or what if we did that? These deal with if scenarios, not necessarily true, but if scenarios. The modus ponens and the modus tollens are both what are called hypothetical syllogisms. Hypothetical situations deal with if. What if we tried it this way? Or what if we did it that way? These deal with if. A syllogism is simply an argument that always has two premises, that's the support, and one conclusion, which is where you're headed, right? So a syllogism has two premises and one conclusion. Now, let's review a little from last time, since these two concepts are definitely related. We talked about the antecedent and the consequent. Do you remember the antebellum before the war and then the consequences of the war? So antecedent comes first, consequent comes second. We could call them part 1 and part 2, but in logic, they're simply called P and Q. So in the modus ponens structure, as you see below, there it is. If P, then Q. P, I'm affirming the antecedent, therefore Q. So modus ponens affirms. It is the mode that affirms by affirming. So it affirms the antecedent, and that leads us to the conclusion, which is Q. All right. Modus tollens looks very similar at the beginning. In fact, it looks identical at the beginning. If P, then Q. So we're starting off in the same exact location, nothing new. Now here comes something new. It's that little wavy line. It's called a tilde. Now it reads not. So in this case, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So you can see a couple differences here between this and the modus ponens. We are now not affirming something, we're denying something. We're saying, no, I'm telling you, Your Honor, that consequent never happened. All right, so this denial of the consequent then leads us to be able to deny the antecedent. So if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. And just like the modus ponens, this is a valid structure, always valid structure. Now, just a note on that little tilde, that little not, this negates whatever you're working with. If you're working with something that's already negative, what happened in math when you negated a negative? You had a negative times a negative. Well, of course, it became positive. So this is just going to flip whatever is there. If you have a positive thing, like he will eat a bowl of cereal, it's going to become he will not eat a bowl of cereal. But if you started off with a negative, like he will not go to the concert, it's not Q is going to be positive. He did go to the concert. Hopefully that's not too confusing, and we'll hit on that again in a second. All right, so more late night Fruit Loops. If he stays up past 11 p.m., he will eat a bowl of Fruit Loops. That's identical to last week's modus ponens. But here we're going to deny the consequent. He did not eat a bowl of Fruit Loops. Therefore, he did not stay up past 11 p.m. If P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. All right, so here I have a couple other examples for you. One from the Bible and one from your random average skeptic, one that's very familiar to us. Let's look at both of these in turn. We're looking for two concepts. Is it valid and is it sound? The first one, if Abraham was justified by works, then he has reason to boast. It's from Romans 4. If Abraham was justified by works, then he has reason to boast. Let's deny that last part. He does not have reason to boast. Therefore, he was not justified by works. We're able to deny the antecedent. Okay, so that's a modus tollens. Let's look at an average skeptic's argument. If God loves people, he won't allow them to go to hell. He does allow them to go to hell. Therefore, he doesn't love them. This is also a modus tollens. In fact, you could literally look at a person in the eye who just said that to you and say, that is a valid argument because it is indeed valid. Now, validity has to do with structure. Validity has to do with if the premises were true, then that conclusion is forced to be true by pure structure. What's the problem with the second one? Well, the problem with the second one is we have an issue with a premise. The premise is not quite right. You could talk about the difference between your friend's view of what love means versus the biblical view of love. You could talk about people choosing versus being allowed, or however you wanted to quibble with that, but your quibble is not with their argument. Your quibble is with a premise. It's a very, very important distinction. Again, you can have false doctrine that is valid, and you can have true doctrine that is valid. Logically, when you have truth put with your validity, then we have what is sound. Of course, on this slide, only the left-hand side is sound because it is not only valid, it is also true. On the other side, we have a valid argument, but it is not sound because the premise number one is not true. Now, recommended resource. I mentioned this last week and I got several remarks, people asking me where to find this resource. I actually used a syllogism straight from this book for my Abraham being justified by works. So this came from this resource. It's called Romans in Logical Form. It's by Sean Nelson, and the foreword is written by Norm Geisler, who most people know as a famous apologist. It is only available as an ebook. It is available on Amazon for $5.99. My disclaimer here is simply this. I am not recommending this as a systematic theology resource. In fact, I haven't even read it to see where I agree and don't agree with its theology at this point. I've only used it for a logical source. So filter what you read as always. And if you're interested in seeing a book of the Bible that has been turned into logical structures, very, very cool resource right there. All right, I hope you have a great week looking for modus tollens. Next time, we'll talk about the modus ponens and modus tollens and how those rules get broken in our average, ordinary conversations and the things that we see and hear.